Just move on up toward your destination. Though you may find from time to time.
What they gonna say now? What they gonna say now? They all gotta pay now.
Yo, I can't just be giving them free game. Where you been?
Yo, peace and blessings. You already know what it is. Emom_OG. Like, comment, subscribe, all that fly shit. Today, we're gonna get into this video. Let me go to my Twitter real quick. And this was something that somebody had sent me. This video was sent to us by 3EV Media and Films at 3EV Films on Twitter. So shout out to you, appreciate that. The link that fam sent me is, I think it's something that worth, everybody checking out, and I could do my usual narrations for the nations, you know what I'm talking about? We're gonna check this out. This video is entitled, How a Horrific Murder in Oklahoma Might Turn Half the State into an Indian Reservation. So, check this out, man.
Hello. Welcome to your extra morning news show. My name is Philip DeFranco, and today we're going to take a deep dive into a Supreme Court case that could significantly alter an entire U.S. state. And it's a case called Carpenter v. Murphy, and from where it started to where it has ended up, it is a wild ride. Now first, let's begin with the horrific origins of how this all began. In the late 90s, you had a man by the name of Patrick Murphy who was living with his girlfriend in eastern Oklahoma. His girlfriend had previously been in a relationship with a man named George Jacobs. And a very important note here is that both Murphy and Jacobs are members of the Muskogee Creek Indian Nation, which is a point that is crucial to this case.
Pause. Yes, it is a point that is crucial to this case. But what I'm gonna do is screenshot the video, zoom in on a picture of this Creek Muskogee Nation member, and let you get a good look at what an Indian look like. You know what I'm saying? Because I know a lot of y'all ain't had the opportunity to go to a reservation. You know what I'm saying? We see clearly that that's a brother. You know what I'm saying? Picture's worth 1,000 words.
And one day, Murphy got into an argument with his girlfriend about her previous relationship with Jacobs and told her that he was going to, quote, get her ex-husband. And on August 28th, 1999, Murphy, along with two of his friends, followed through on that promise. That evening, at around 9:30 p.m., the three men went out driving in the town of Henrietta, Oklahoma, and happened to pass Jacobs, who was in the back seat of his cousin's car. Murphy then proceeded to turn the car around and run Jacobs and his cousin off the road. And then, in the midst of a vicious beating of the two men, Murphy killed Jacobs by slashing his throat and severing his genitals with a folding knife. And according to court documents, Murphy confessed his crime to his girlfriend that same night after returning home. And in 2000, he was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death by a jury. And so looking at that situation, most people would go, okay, well, that's that. That's an open and shut case. Well, as you might have guessed, because we're talking about it, no. In 2004, during the appeals process, Murphy argued that the crime had taken place within the boundaries of the Creek Indian Reservation, whose official borders were established in 1866.
All right, boom. Official borders, 1866. Now, he finessing the legal system. He in there jammed up. He like, shit, I'm trying any way, which way to get up out of here. So now he done brought up the 1866 treaty that say this is Indian land. You can't prosecute me. You can't have me in here. You know what I'm saying? The state of Oklahoma can't prosecute me. You know what I'm saying? It's illegal. So that's why it's wild, because see, this information is known. All y'all slave brain trolls coming on my page commenting, but at the end of the day, bro, this information is attainable. You know what I'm saying? That's how it's getting to a point where you comment like I'm dumb. You just showing and proving that you dumb. It's hawk school. Fuck you. Hawks don't fly with pigeons.
66. And the reason that matters is if the court agreed that the entirety of this reservation's borders were still in place today, it would mean that this case should not have been under the state of Oklahoma's jurisdiction. This is because of an 1885 law known as the Major Crimes Act, which states that certain crimes like murder that are committed by Indians within Indian country should be prosecuted by the federal government, not the state government. And while this reasoning was initially rejected by Oklahoma's state courts, a federal...
I'm gonna pause. Boom, we're gonna zoom in, you know what I'm saying? So everybody can see. Any Indian who commits against the person or property of another Indian or other person any of the following offenses, namely murder, manslaughter, kidnapping, maiming, a felony under Chapter 109A, incest, a felony assault under Section 113, an assault against an individual who is not attained, blah, 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 within the Indian country shall be subject to the same law and penalties as other persons committing any of the above offenses within the exclusive jurisdiction of the United States.
While this reasoning was initially rejected by Oklahoma state courts, a federal court eventually ruled in the favor of Murphy. And so on November 9th, 2017, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the, quote, crime occurred on the Creek Reservation and therefore the Oklahoma courts lacked jurisdiction. Now, in order to understand why this ruling is such a massive deal and could have lasting ramifications beyond this individual case, you have to look at the map of the reservation's 1866 borders. Because if these borders were officially recognized by the federal government, the Creek Reservation would encompass 4,600 square miles of land. Land that is now home to more than 750,000 people, this including most of Tulsa, which is Oklahoma's second biggest city.
Yeah, you pause that, because I definitely have something to say about that. Because, like I said, man, this school, you know what I'm saying? So we just watching the videos, reading the books, no blinders on, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's why I ain't even coming at this, on no, you know what I'm saying, religious level or none of that. You're just gonna see it from a hawk's view. Now, I'm saying that to say this. That's Tulsa, right? Oklahoma. It's on the Indian reservation, inside of the Indian border. This Tulsa, Black Wall Street. You know what I'm saying? It's supposed to be where so-called black people bubble. You know what I'm saying? Everybody was getting the bag, but y'all want to act like the so-called Negro and the Indians ain't the same thing.
Yeah, Indians, niggas, same thing.
Here go Tulsa, Oklahoma, one of the most thriving black communities that existed before them racist ass KKK ass Democrats came in, setting the whole thing on fire. We already seen the video with Olivia J. Hooker, one of the last survivors of the Tulsa, Oklahoma riots. She said herself it wasn't no riot. They came up in her house setting it on fire. And she obviously looked like an Indian. And she looked like like Luzia the woman, or the Luzia woman. Here go Tulsa right here in Indian country, my nigga. You know what I'm saying? Oh, those was all the free slaves. Nigga, you came from slaves, nigga. I ain't come from slaves. Nobody finna work this shit out of me. So I already know what's in my DNA. I'm not on that. Fuck, nigga, this why I'm on YouTube, running up a bag. Goddamn me chopping it up with the peace pipe like a chief do. You know what I'm saying? All that, man, I'm good. Reading and I be studying and they be acting like, oh, the natives hadn't progressed or nigga, everybody was good. Man, we ain't even gonna go there, man. Tulsa, Oklahoma, Indian country. Google it.
And if this case sets a precedent for long-ignored reservation borders once again being recognized, more than 40% of the state would be made up of reservations.
Pause. I gotta pause it. Now look at that, bro. More than 40% of the state of Oklahoma would be made up of reservation land. Now they saying if we, you know, let this treaty stand, that means all these people living here is living on Indian land. Cherokee, Creek, Seminole, Chickasaw, Choctaw. You know what I'm talking about? Look at it, bruh. That 40% of Oklahoma is Indian land right now, today. Did you know that?
So as you can probably imagine, with these stakes at play, Oklahoma wasn't just going to let the 10th Circuit Court's ruling stand. On February 6, 2018, the state's prison warden petitioned the Supreme Court to overrule the decision, and at the end of November, the court heard oral arguments in the case. But before we dive into that courtroom showdown, we need a kind of a history lesson concerning one of America's darkest eras. During the 1830s, about 125,000 Native Americans lived on millions of acres of land in the southern United States.
125,000 Native Americans lived on millions of acres of land.
It's land that their ancestors had lived on for generations.
Land that their ancestors had lived on for generations.
And the majority of which were from 5 autonomous nations. You had the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Seminole, and Muskogee Creek. Well, U.S. President Andrew Jackson was not a fan of having Indians living on valuable land that could be inhabited by white settlers. So in 1830, Congress passes the Indian Removal Act, which paved the way for the forced relocation of these nations to the west of the Mississippi River, today's Oklahoma.
I just want to pause it here, man, for y'all to get an understanding, because everybody talking about the Trail of Tears, oh, they had to walk to Oklahoma. Nigga, walk where? Who walked across the Mississippi River? Who grandma get across, forged the Mississippi, granny? You see what we've been through and we still here? That's how you know it's us. Because I'm still right here, unconquered. We still here, bruh. You just gonna sit there and not even try to know yourself?
Thousands of Native Americans died on this journey from starvation and disease, including an estimated 3,500 of the 15,000 Muskogee Creek Indians. And after this forced relocation, the Creek signed a series of treaties with the United States government, culminating in the established boundaries of their reservation in 1866. But then, surprise, surprise, just 2 decades later, the federal government once again fucks over the Five Nations after Congress passes the Dawes Act in 1887.
Let's bring that back. It's not every day you see a European keep it real.
Then, surprise, surprise, just 2 decades later, the federal government once again fucks over the Five Nations after Congress passes the Dawes Act in 1887. And the Dawes Act gave the President of the United States the power to split up tracts of land within established reservations. And specifically, they did this through a policy called allotment, where the government negotiated with various tribes to divide up communally held Indian land into individually owned property.
Okay, so now you see the Dawes Act. We know about the Dawes Rolls. So now we see it's a law to go with it.
And this was an attempt to assimilate Native Americans into Western society.
Now, you see, that's another thing. They say communal owned land into allotments of property. We just had the whole hood ours, man. We just roaming free. You know what I'm saying? Whole hood. You know what I'm talking about? Millions of acres. But then they came, now he just said with the Dawes Act. Now, of course, we're gonna do a video on the Dawes Act, because we definitely got to dig into that now that we know it's a Dawes Act, a Dawes Roll. Who is Dawes? You know what I'm saying?
Property. And this was an attempt to assimilate Native Americans into Western society, considering that individual land ownership was a foreign concept that went against the culture of these nations.
Individual land ownership was a foreign concept that went against these individual nations. Why you niggas out here being selfish? Stop that.
This allotment policy eventually led to non-Indians being allowed to settle on reservation land by paying a fee, as well as the construction of railroads through these areas. But the Creek Nation refused to negotiate, so Congress then decided to increase the pressure. And so in 1889, President Grover Cleveland signed the Indian Appropriations Act. And this opened up 2 million acres of what they called unassigned land just outside the reservations for settlement by whites. This led to a massive land rush, and by 1890, whites outnumbered Native Americans in today's Oklahoma by 3 to 1. And so by 1901, the Creek had no other option but to agree to both allotment and severe restrictions on their legislative power. And then in April of 1906, Congress put the final nail in the coffin with the passage of the Five Civilized Tribes Act. And that act removed nearly all sovereign powers from the governments of the Five Nations, also giving the President of the United States the authority to approve tribal chiefs and removing the ability of tribal governments to institute any sort of tax system. However,
what? So the government can approve tribal chiefs? Remove the ability of tribal governments to institute any sort of tax system? They live in the projects, bro, and they can't leave.
However, a key part of that act states, quote, "The lands belonging to the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, Creek, or Seminole tribes upon the dissolution of said tribes shall not become public lands nor property of the United States."
Boom. Bring that back, because that's a clue right there. You got to be looking for clues, man. Remember, I told you, we got these colonists under investigation. They just ain't going to come out. You know what I'm saying? And say it straight out. You got to look for the clues. We're going to put it on the screen. The lands belonging to the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, Creek, or Seminole tribes upon the dissolution of said tribes shall not become public lands nor property of the United States, but shall be held in trust by the United States for the use and benefit of the Indians respectively, comprising each of said tribes, and their heirs as the same shall appear by the rolls as finally concluded as heretofore and hereinafter provided for. We definitely got to dig into it, but so they got it in trust. You know what I'm saying? They deciding who the Indians is. They just said it. They electing the chiefs and all that. You know what I'm saying? That's why I say it's the projects, bro. You know what I'm saying? Like, he picking the chief of the tribe. Like, damn, what's you the manager of the projects or the apartment complex, my nigga? Millions of acres. Count it up.
Section 28 of the Act also specifically allowing the governments to remain operational despite the fact that they had little to no power left. Now, what happens later is Oklahoma becomes a state in 1907. Decades pass, the original boundaries of these reservations become a distant memory for most of its citizens. And actually, as far as Carpenter v. Murphy, this isn't the first time the Supreme Court has decided on a case like this. In 1984, in a case called Solemn v. Bartlett, the court ruled in the favor of a man from the Cheyenne River Sioux who was convicted of rape by the state of South Dakota. He had previously challenged his conviction, saying that the crime occurred on reservation land and therefore he should not have been tried in a South Dakota state court.
Hey man, it's really sad that it take a savage motherfucker getting jammed up, you know what I'm saying, in that box to go into the paperwork and the laws, digging through the crates, finding all this information. So this is why it's even deeper. These niggas in the penitentiary, in a box, and they getting the information that you niggas act like ain't available to you, sitting there with the iPhone Malcolm X, goddamn me, and you can't find the information. Talking about I'm lying. It's a nigga trapped in a box, nigga, in the middle of nowhere who know I ain't lying. How you don't know?
And the court unanimously ruled that just because parts of the reservation were sold off to outsiders, that did not mean that the boundaries of the reservation were diminished. Also, even more recently, in 2016, the court heard a case called Nebraska v. Parker. In that case, the Omaha Nation in Nebraska wanted all alcohol establishments in a small town called Pender to pay a tax to the tribe, arguing that the town was within reservation borders. And once again, the court agreed that the selling off of land does not impact the reservation's boundaries. And so now that I've crammed almost 200 years of history into 3 minutes, we finally arrived at the oral arguments of Carpenter v. Murphy. And Lisa Blatt, the attorney for the current prison warden and the named party in the case, Carpenter, came out firing, arguing that because almost all of the Creek's sovereignty had been stripped by the 1906 Civilized Tribes Act, Congress had the intent of eliminating the reservation.
Congress destroyed all features of a reservation by terminating all sovereignty over the land in the march up to statehood. Their taxes were abolished, their tribal law was rendered unenforceable, every single federal court, tribal chief, tribal lawyer, members of Congress, Oklahoma historians, and the popular press recognized that the only authority they had was to equalize allotments with the money and sign deeds.
What about 1906? They say the tribal existence and present tribal governments of the 5 tribes are hereby continued in full force and effect for all purposes authorized by law unless otherwise provided by law.
Yeah, what about that, bitch? What you gonna say about that, bitch?
In the same act I just read you, there's at least 7 provisions stripping them of every authority they had left.
But Ms. Wright, what you're suggesting is that the idea of a reservation is always and necessarily linked to full tribal authority over that land, and that has just never been the case.
So she trying to argue like, oh, they don't have no rights to the land, and the judge even said that's not always the case. They got us jammed up in the paperwork, man. If they killed us through the paperwork, then the only way we gonna resurrect is through the paperwork. Niggas wanna act like, well, what you gonna do? Well, some nigga comment talking about, I'm ready to kill everybody. Well, come on here with that old agent ass set me up shit, nigga. I'm really from the hood, boy. I ain't trying to do nothing to nobody. On some real shit, it's all in the paperwork, man. What your teacher always tell you in school, do your homework, man. Did you do your homework?
The justices also wanted to know about the practical implications of recognizing this land as a reservation. In response to that, Blatt and her colleagues argued that any person of Indian descent who committed a crime on reservation land would no longer be subject to state prosecution.
Now imagine that. They can't even do nothing to you, see, but that's why they making sure that they control that's why they making sure that they control the tribes and they control the chiefs. You know what I'm saying? Because otherwise, it'd be up to the chief to decide. They're like, man, what we gonna do with this nigga? You might have caught an M because a nigga tried to rob you, you know what I'm saying? He might put up on you at the jack in the crack with the strap, you know what I'm talking about? I don't let him have it, you know what I mean? Because he was tripping. We ain't gonna send you to prison for that. Not if I'm chief.
And saying that an affirmative ruling here could call into question thousands of other convictions that have been obtained by state courts.
There are 2,000 prisoners in state court who committed a crime in the former Indian Territory who self-identify as Native American. That's 155 murderers, 113 rapists, and over 200 felons who committed crimes against children. The reopening of any of these cases would re-traumatize the victims, the families, and the communities. Nor is it clear that the federal government could retry any of these cases because the evidence is too stale or the statute of limitations has expired, which appears to be the case in about half of them.
So how she coming at it, she coming on the angle like, well, if y'all recognize this, then we're gonna have to let all the murderers, rapists, child molesters, everybody get out. God forbid, you know what I'm saying? But dude gonna argue, you know what I'm saying? He gonna argue against it, but that's how she playing, you know what I'm saying? She playing a psychological game on you, like, you gonna let all these murderers out and all these rapists out, we can't uphold this law, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, pay attention.
And there was also a second attorney that was supporting Carpenter, Edwin Niebler, who listed other potential impacts beyond criminal justice.
The Indians could not be taxed by the state in the entire area of the former reservation of income tax if they earned it there. They couldn't be imposed a sales tax. This would be a dramatic change from the way everyone has understood it for the past 100 years.
Then, on the other side of this, you had Murphy's attorney, Ian Gershengorn, taken to the floor to rebut Blatt and Needler's claims.
The state's concerns are dramatically overstated. In the state already completed convictions, we don't know what the state would do, but the state has a laches doctrine.
And laches doctrine here just means that the legal claim won't be enforced if there is a long delay in making that claim. The argument then moved beyond criminal justice issues.
Imagine you are a small businessman in Tulsa.
So every angle these people coming at, it seems, it appears, that they like, oh, you gonna let the savages loose? Because now he's saying, well, what if it's a small business owner in Oklahoma? It's already 60% European. We already know that. So 9 times out of 10, he ain't talking about that 40% of Indian country. And even them, they own Indian country. So he ain't talking about the Indians that's there. He talking about all them Europeans that own stores and find out they own Indian country. Imagine all the millions, probably billions, you know what I'm saying? Imagine all the millions of dollars and billions of dollars in tax money that's being collected. And then the U.S. government is collecting it, but really they should be paying it to the tribes. So now he's like, oh, well, it's just too much paperwork. It would just be too hard on the average Joe.
And suddenly, our court decision. And all they know is they're part of the reservation. What I'm concerned about is they think, I have 5,000 laws already to deal with, infinite numbers of forms to figure out. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do?
Although the person may wake up and say, gee, I'm in a reservation now.
What do I do? What do I do?
In fact, this court's cases have already limited tribal authority over non-members on fee land within a reservation. So although the person may wake up and say, oh, I'm in a reservation, the answer is your life doesn't change all that much.
Well, just to pause for a moment, you see it's not going to be any difference when you wake up. What if the tribe decides not to allow the type of business in which you're engaged, such as alcoholic beverages, and you're in a reservation? Can they say you need a license from the tribe to sell alcoholic beverages?
So, Your Honor,
not going to give you
alcohol has always been separate. It has been special in Indian lands, and with respect to alcoholic beverage in particular, there may be additional regulation.
So, you know they got niggas out there wasted, drunk, you know what I'm saying, killing themselves. It's a whole separate group of laws for the liquor. He talking about liquor always been separate. So pay attention, man. Remember, it's an investigation, man. Well, it's separate laws for liquor on Indian land, you know what I'm saying? Because he's saying, well, what if you can, what if somebody that don't want you selling liquor on the Indian reservation? You know what I'm talking about?
With respect to a construction business operated by a non-member on fee land, no.
And so as you can see from these arguments, this is an enormously complex case that could have drastic implications, or maybe not, depending on which legal arguments you think are stronger. The problem, though, is that while we have some smaller scale precedents to look to, the size of this potential reservation is unprecedented. If the court rules that this land is still a reservation, it would be by far the largest Indian reservation in the United States by population. And it could set the stage for an enormously complex legal and tax structure for hundreds of thousands of Oklahoma citizens.
I just want to pause this because I just had a thought. Look at what sparked this off. Look at how it say how the Most High will bring the good out of any situation. Like, ain't that crazy, bro? All this is being sparked off of one fucking Indian who cut off a nigga nuts.
Until the court issues its decision, we're ultimately just left guessing exactly what it'll look like. And so, with all of that said, like we do with every story that we cover on this channel, I pass the question off to you. What do you think about it? Do you think that because Congress never explicitly eliminated the boundaries of this reservation, that it should be once again recognized to correct a historical injustice? Or no, do you think that it's no longer practical to view this land as a reservation? Also, thoughts about the potential of having to retry thousands of violent criminal cases? And I know there's a lot to dissect here, but I'm very interested, and so I pass the question off to you.
Okay, well, I appreciate you. You know what I'm saying? If you made it this far into the video, salute, gratitude, respect. Leave your comment below. What do you think? You know what I mean? Should the reservation be recognized? You know, because that mean a nigga who slit somebody's throat is gonna get off. You know what I'm saying? That's the picture they paint. They gonna tell you everything bad about it, even though we know this whole motherfucker Indian country. So what difference do it make? You know what I'm saying? If you recognize it. Because they making it like, if we uphold this, and that's what I'm saying, we got to get on our generation, the OG niggas, you know, like me, you know what I'm saying? Like me, you know what I'm saying? From the slap-a-hole era, forgive me, but you know what I'm saying? I'm just saying. I said I was going to change my behavior a little bit, not change it, but evolve a little more. So I feel like, me personally, I feel like this is the invader's language. Like, how you going to make me say it properly? You know what I'm saying? Like, you're saying cuss words, it's all curses, it's just spelling. It ain't nothing but one big curse. And English is which language anyway? How is it bad language? It's bad language for me, period. I'm fucking Indian. Come to find out, so every word I say that's English is bad language for me. You know what I'm saying? Every word I say, every word I say. Man, I appreciate you tuning in. Like, comment, subscribe, man. Let us know, man. Should the Indian land be recognized? Or what? Should you let Donald Trump decide who get to be the chief of the tribe? You know what it is, Imam_OG. Peace and blessings.
Just move on up toward your destination.